The sun was setting over the bustling city when Omar, a wealthy and powerful Arabic millionaire, sat quietly in the back seat of his sleek black car. The world saw him as a man who had everything: money, status, and influence. But behind his composed exterior, Omar carried a deep emptiness. He had built an empire, yet his life felt incomplete. His wife, Layla, couldn't bear children due to a medical condition, and the thought of living without a child weighed heavily on him. Not far away, Amara, a homeless woman in her late 20s, struggled to find shelter for the night. She sat by the roadside, clutching her worn-out backpack, the only possession she had left. Life had been cruel to her, but Amara's spirit remained unbroken. She had learned to survive in a world that often turned a blind eye to her existence. That evening, as she watched people pass by without noticing her, Amara wondered if her life would ever change. Fate intervened when Omar's car stopped at a red light near the corner where Amara was sitting. Through the tinted glass, he noticed her standing up for an older homeless man being harassed by a group of teenagers. She didn't hesitate to put herself in harm's way to protect someone weaker than her. Omar was intrigued by her bravery and resilience. In that moment, an idea formed in his mind. An idea that could change both of their lives forever. "Stop the car," Omar instructed his driver. The sleek vehicle pulled over, and Omar stepped out, his tailored suit contrasting sharply with the worn streets. As he approached Amara, she looked up, her tired eyes meeting his. "Do you have a moment?" he asked in a calm but commanding tone. Amara hesitated, unsure of his intentions. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cautious but firm. Omar gestured toward a nearby cafe. "Let's talk somewhere comfortable," he suggested. Reluctantly, Amara followed, curious about what this stranger could possibly want from her. Inside the cafe, Omar ordered tea for both of them and began to explain. "I know this might sound unusual," he said, his voice steady, "but I have a proposition for you." Amara frowned, unsure of where this conversation was heading. Omar continued, "I can see that life has been hard for you. I'm offering you a way out, a chance to rebuild your life." "What kind of chance?" Amara asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Omar leaned forward, his eyes serious. "I want you to have a child for me. In return, I will ensure that you have financial stability for the rest of your life. You'll never have to struggle again." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at Omar, trying to process his words. "You want me to have your baby?" she asked, her voice trembling. Omar nodded. "I understand this is a lot to take in, but I'm willing to give you time to think it over. All I ask is that you consider it seriously." Amara's mind raced. The offer seemed too good to be true, yet the sincerity in Omar's voice made her pause. She had spent years surviving on scraps, with no hope of a better future. Now she was being offered a lifeline. But at what cost? "Why me?" she finally asked. Omar smiled faintly. "Because you're strong. I saw it in the way you stood up for that man. You have a good heart, and I believe you can give this child something special." Amara looked away, overwhelmed by the weight of the decision before her. She had no family, no home, and no support system. This could be her chance to escape the cycle of poverty and despair. But the idea of carrying a stranger's child felt daunting and surreal. "I'll need time," she said quietly. Omar nodded. "Take all the time you need. If you decide to accept, my offer stands." He slid a business card across the table. "Call me when you're ready." With that, Omar left, leaving Amara alone with her thoughts. She stared at the card, her fingers tracing the embossed lettering. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. But it was accompanied by a deep sense of uncertainty. That night, as Amara lay on a thin mattress in a crowded shelter, she replayed the conversation in her mind. Could she trust Omar? Was this a genuine opportunity, or was there more to his offer than he was letting on? Amara knew she had to make a choice, one that could change her life forever. The next morning, she stood outside a payphone, clutching the card tightly. With a deep breath, she dialed the number. When Omar answered, his voice calm and reassuring, she said the words that would set everything into motion. "I'm in." Amara's life took a sharp turn when she moved into Omar's luxurious villa. The grand estate was like nothing she had ever seen before. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and every corner of the house seemed to whisper stories of wealth and power. For someone who had spent years surviving on the streets, the sudden change was overwhelming. Amara's first instinct was to shrink into herself, feeling like an intruder in a world she didn't belong to. "This is your home now," Omar told her on the first day, his voice calm but firm. "You'll have everything you need. Clothes, food, medical care. It's all taken care of." Amara nodded, but she couldn't shake the unease that crept over her. She was grateful for the opportunity, but the weight of the arrangement hung heavy on her shoulders. She was here to carry Omar's child, and the realization of that responsibility was daunting. The staff treated her with polite indifference, keeping their distance while ensuring her comfort. However, one presence in the house made her transition even harder. Omar's wife, Layla. Layla was a striking woman, elegant and poised, but her eyes held a coldness that sent shivers down Amara's spine. From the moment they met, Layla's disapproval was evident. "So, you're the one he chose," Layla said during their first encounter, her tone sharp and her gaze unwavering. Amara swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. I'm just trying to do what I've agreed to," she stammered. Layla's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. "We'll see how long that lasts." Amara's days in the villa were a mix of comfort and isolation. She had everything she needed, but the unfamiliarity of her surroundings made her feel out of place. The staff were professional but distant, and Layla's icy demeanor made it clear that Amara was not welcome in her world. Omar, on the other hand, was attentive and understanding. He checked on her frequently, ensuring she was comfortable and healthy. "How are you settling in?" he asked one evening, sitting across from her in the grand living room. Amara hesitated before answering. "It's different. I'm grateful, but it's hard to adjust." Omar nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. This is a big change for you. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." His kindness was unexpected, and it made Amara wonder about the man behind the wealth. He seemed genuine, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. As the days turned into weeks, Amara began to notice cracks in the perfect facade of Omar's life. Late at night, she often heard muffled arguments between Omar and Layla behind closed doors. Their voices carried a mix of frustration and pain, hinting at a marriage strained by unspoken tensions. Amara couldn't help but feel like an intruder in their personal battles, even though she was indirectly a part of them. One afternoon, as Amara was walking through the garden, she stumbled upon Omar sitting alone on a bench. His usual composed demeanor was replaced with a distant, almost melancholic expression. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously. Omar looked up, surprised by her presence. After a moment of silence, he sighed. "Sometimes, even when you have everything, it doesn't feel like enough," he admitted. Amara sat down beside him, her curiosity piqued. "Why do you feel that way?" she asked. Omar hesitated before speaking. "I've spent my life building an empire, but in the process, I've lost sight of what really matters. Family, connection, those are the things money can't buy." His words lingered in Amara's mind long after their conversation ended. She began to see Omar not as the powerful millionaire she had initially met, but as a man carrying his own burdens. Despite his wealth, he was just as lost as she was in many ways. Meanwhile, Layla's hostility toward Amara continued to grow. She often made snide comments and found subtle ways to remind Amara of her place. "Don't get too comfortable," she warned one evening. "This is temporary. Once the baby is born, you'll be out of here." Amara's frustration began to bubble under the surface, but she chose to remain silent. She reminded herself that she was here for a reason, and she couldn't let Layla's bitterness affect her. However, the tension in the house became harder to ignore as time went on. Despite the challenges, Amara found small moments of peace. She began to explore the villa's library, losing herself in books that transported her to different worlds. Reading became her escape, a way to momentarily forget the complexities of her situation. Occasionally, Omar would join her, and they would discuss the stories they read. These moments of connection surprised Amara, making her realize that Omar valued her thoughts and opinions. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Omar shared a story from his past. "When I was a boy, my family wasn't as wealthy as we are now," he began. "My sister and I used to dream about building a life where we'd never have to struggle again. She was my best friend, but I lost her in an accident when we were young. It changed me." Amara listened intently, her heart aching for the man who had endured so much loss. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Omar gave a small, sad smile. "It's part of the reason I'm so determined to have a child. I want to create something good out of the pain I've experienced." Amara began to see her role in Omar's life in a new light. This wasn't just a transaction. It was a deeply personal mission for him. She realized that her decision to carry his child wasn't just about money or survival. It was about being part of something bigger than herself. As the weeks passed, Amara slowly started to adjust to her new life. She still felt out of place at times, but she began to find strength in her role. The tension with Layla remained, but she learned to navigate it with grace. And though Omar's life was far from perfect, Amara couldn't deny that he had given her something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As the months passed, Amara's life began to revolve around her pregnancy. Her days at the villa were a mix of routine and self-reflection. The once strange luxury of her surroundings became familiar, but the emotional weight of her situation grew heavier with each passing day. She couldn't help but wonder about the life she was creating, about what her role would truly be once the baby was born. Every morning, a nurse visited to check on Amara's health. The staff ensured she had everything she needed, from nutritious meals to prenatal vitamins. Still, despite the care she received, Amara often felt isolated. The grandeur of the villa couldn't fill the void of meaningful human connection. She missed the raw authenticity of her life on the streets, even with its struggles. Here, she felt like a stranger in someone else's world. Omar, however, made an effort to be present. He often joined Amara for tea in the garden, asking about her well-being and how the baby was growing. Though he was busy managing his business empire, he made time for these moments, showing a side of himself that was compassionate and genuine. Amara appreciated his efforts, but she couldn't ignore the questions bubbling in her mind. "What will happen after the baby is born?" she asked one afternoon, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Omar looked at her, his expression soft but serious. "You'll be well taken care of, Amara. That's my promise to you. But if you wish to leave and start a new life, I won't stop you." His answer left her conflicted. The financial security he offered was tempting, but the thought of walking away from the child she was carrying felt impossible. She wasn't just a surrogate. She was starting to feel a bond with the life growing inside her. Meanwhile, Layla's coldness toward Amara escalated into outright hostility. She resented the attention Omar gave to Amara and saw her as a threat to their fragile marriage. Layla's sharp comments became more frequent, each one a reminder that Amara didn't belong in their world. "You're just a means to an end," Layla hissed one evening, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't mistake his kindness for anything more." Amara bit her tongue, refusing to engage. She knew Layla's words came from a place of pain, but they still cut deep. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day, and Amara found herself seeking solace in the quiet corners of the villa. One night, as she lay awake, Amara's mind drifted to her own childhood. Memories of her parents' laughter and the warmth of their modest home filled her thoughts. They had taught her the value of resilience and kindness, lessons she carried with her even in the darkest times. She realized she wanted to pass those values on to her child, no matter the circumstances. As her pregnancy progressed, Amara began to experience the joys and challenges of motherhood. She felt the baby's first kick one quiet morning, a moment that filled her with an unexpected sense of wonder. "You're really in there," she whispered, placing a hand on her growing belly. It was a reminder that, despite the complexities of her situation, something beautiful was taking shape. Omar shared in these moments whenever he could. He was fascinated by the little milestones, asking Amara to describe what she felt and what the doctor said during her checkups. His enthusiasm was genuine, and for the first time, Amara saw a glimpse of the father he wanted to be. But not all was smooth in the journey of her pregnancy. Amara began to notice subtle signs of unease in Omar. He seemed preoccupied during their conversations, his mind often drifting elsewhere. When she pressed him, he brushed it off, saying it was business-related. Yet Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something was troubling him. One evening, as they sat in the study, Omar finally opened up. "Amara," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I need to tell you something about my family." He hesitated before continuing. "There's a history of complications in my bloodline. It's part of the reason I'm so invested in this child. I need to know that my family's legacy will continue, but I also fear what might happen." Amara listened intently, her heart aching for the man who carried so much responsibility on his shoulders. "You're doing everything you can," she reassured him. "This child will be loved, and that's what matters most." Her words seemed to comfort Omar, but the conversation left Amara with lingering questions. What kind of complications was he referring to? And how might they affect the baby? As her due date approached, Amara's bond with the baby deepened. She began to dream of holding the child, imagining their tiny hands and the sound of their laughter. But alongside her excitement was a growing sense of dread. The life she had known was slipping away, and a new, uncertain future awaited her. The tension in the villa reached a boiling point when Layla confronted Omar in the middle of the night. Amara overheard their heated exchange from her room, their voices echoing through the halls. "You're replacing me," Layla accused, her voice trembling with anger. "You care more about that woman and her child than you do about us." "This isn't about replacing anyone," Omar argued. "This is about building a future. You knew this was the only way." The argument ended with Layla storming out, leaving Omar standing alone in the hallway. Amara stayed in her room, unsure of what to do. She felt trapped between the fractured dynamics of their marriage and her own growing connection to the baby. In the quiet moments that followed, Amara made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would do everything in her power to ensure the baby's well-being. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to face it with strength and love. The day Amara had been anxiously awaiting finally arrived. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the villa as she felt the first sharp pangs of labor. Her heart raced not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she was about to meet the life she had carried for so many months. Omar was by her side in an instant, his usually calm demeanor replaced by visible concern. "It's time," she whispered, gripping his hand. Omar nodded, his expression a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The medical team had been on standby for weeks, and within moments the villa transformed into a flurry of activity. Layla, however, stayed distant, watching from the corner of the room with an unreadable expression. Hours felt like days as Amara endured the intense pain of childbirth. But when the first cries of the baby echoed through the room, every ounce of discomfort melted away. A nurse placed the tiny bundle in Amara's arms, and tears streamed down her face as she looked at the child she had nurtured. The baby's wide eyes seemed to take in the world with curiosity and innocence. Omar stood frozen for a moment, his gaze fixed on the newborn. When he finally stepped closer, his hand trembled as he reached out to touch the baby's tiny fingers. "He's perfect," Omar murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Amara felt a wave of warmth at his words, but a part of her wondered what this moment truly meant for their complicated arrangement. Layla's reaction, however, was starkly different. She stayed silent, her arms crossed tightly as she stared at the baby. There was no joy in her eyes, only a simmering resentment that seemed to grow with each passing second. "So, this is it," she said coldly, her words cutting through the room like a blade. "Your heir." Omar turned to Layla, his expression pained. "Layla, this child is part of our family now. He deserves love and acceptance." Layla scoffed, her bitterness spilling over. "Our family? Don't fool yourself, Omar. This was your decision, not mine. You've replaced everything we had with this." She gestured toward the baby, her voice laced with disdain. Without another word, she stormed out of the room, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Amara's joy was tempered by the tension in the air. She looked down at the baby, her heart swelling with love and protectiveness. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "I'll make sure you're safe." In the days following the birth, Omar's behavior shifted. He was deeply involved in caring for the baby, spending hours holding him and marveling at his every movement. But there was also a growing unease in him, as though he were carrying a burden he couldn't share. Amara noticed the way he avoided certain questions and the distant look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't long before the truth began to surface. One evening, as Amara fed the baby in the nursery, Omar appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, his usual confidence replaced by vulnerability. "Amara, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. Amara's heart sank at his tone. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her stomach. Omar hesitated, then sat down across from her. "There's something I didn't tell you when we made this arrangement," he began. "Something about my family's history." Amara listened intently as Omar explained. His family's wealth and power came with a legacy of secrecy and control. For generations, the men in his bloodline had struggled with a genetic condition that often manifested in their children. It was the reason he had been so desperate to ensure his family's future. "I needed to know that my child would be healthy," he admitted, his voice breaking. "But now, I don't know if I made the right choices." The weight of his confession settled heavily on Amara. She looked down at the baby, her heart aching for the innocent life caught in the middle of so much complexity. "Omar, no child is perfect," she said gently. "What matters is that we love and support him no matter what challenges come our way." Omar nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "You're right. I just want to give him the life he deserves." As the days turned into weeks, Amara's bond with the baby grew stronger. She cherished every smile, every tiny coo, and every moment of connection. But with that bond came a deepening conflict within her. She couldn't imagine leaving the child behind, even though she knew that had been the original plan. Omar noticed her growing attachment and confronted her one evening. "Amara, I see the way you look at him," he said softly. "You're his mother in every way that matters. If you want to stay, I won't stop you." Tears filled Amara's eyes as she considered his words. She had come into this arrangement with a clear purpose, but somewhere along the way, her heart had shifted. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring content like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like this video and share where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. She wasn't just a surrogate anymore. She was a mother, and she couldn't walk away from the life she had helped bring into the world. But staying wouldn't be easy. Layla's resentment continued to fester, and the dynamics of the household grew increasingly strained. Amara knew that if she chose to remain, she would have to navigate a delicate balance of love, loyalty, and conflict. In the quiet of the nursery, as she held the baby close, Amara made her decision. She would stay not for the luxury or security, but for the child who had become her entire world. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she was ready to face them with unwavering strength and love. Life at the villa had become a delicate balance of hope and tension. The baby's arrival had changed everything, and the relationships between Amara, Omar, and Layla were at a crossroads. The days following Amara's decision to stay were filled with uncertainty, but they also held the promise of a new chapter. Layla's resentment had not waned. She avoided Amara and the baby, spending most of her time in the farthest corners of the villa. Omar tried to bridge the growing divide between them, but his efforts often ended in heated arguments. "This was your choice, Omar," Layla snapped one evening. "You've built a family without me. Don't expect me to pretend everything is fine." Omar sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Layla, I never wanted to hurt you. But this child is a part of our family now, whether you accept it or not." Amara watched these confrontations from a distance, torn between guilt and the fierce love she felt for the baby. She wanted peace, not just for herself, but for the child who deserved a united family. One afternoon, she approached Layla, determined to address the tension. "Layla, can we talk?" Amara asked cautiously. Layla glanced at her, her expression unreadable, but she nodded. They sat in the garden, the air heavy with unspoken words. "I know this situation isn't fair to you," Amara began. "I never wanted to come between you and Omar. But this baby, he's innocent in all of this. He deserves love from all of us." Layla's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Do you think it's that simple? You've taken something from me, Amara, something I can never get back." Amara reached out, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not here to replace you. I'm here because this child needs me. And I think deep down you need him too." For the first time, Layla's defenses seemed to waver. She looked away, her shoulders slumping as she whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to do it alone," Amara said gently. "None of us do." The conversation marked a turning point. While Layla's anger didn't vanish overnight, a tentative truce began to form. She started spending more time with the baby, her initial reluctance giving way to quiet affection. Amara watched from a distance, her heart swelling with hope. Perhaps she thought healing was possible after all. Meanwhile, Omar was grappling with his own transformation. The weight of his family's legacy no longer felt like an unshakable burden. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity to redefine what that legacy meant. He spent hours with the baby, dreaming of the life he wanted to build for him, one that was filled with love, compassion, and freedom from the constraints of the past. One evening, as the sun set over the villa, Omar gathered everyone in the grand dining room. Amara, Layla, and the baby were seated around the table, the air thick with anticipation. "I've made a decision," Omar announced, his voice steady. "This family has been through so much, but it's time to move forward. I want us to rebuild not just for ourselves, but for this child. He deserves a future filled with love and unity." Layla looked at him, her expression softening. "And how do you plan to do that, Omar?" "By letting go of the past," he replied. "By focusing on what truly matters. This family." Amara felt a surge of emotion at his words. For the first time, she saw a path forward, a future where they could all coexist, not without challenges, but with a shared purpose. She looked at the baby in her arms, his innocent gaze a reminder of the fresh start they all needed. The weeks that followed were filled with small but meaningful steps. Layla began to take an active role in caring for the baby, her initial hesitations replaced by genuine affection. She and Amara found common ground, their shared love for the child bridging the gap between them. Omar, too, seemed lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. One evening, as they all sat together in the garden, the baby's laughter filled the air. Amara looked around at the scene before her. Omar's smile, Layla's gentle touch as she held the baby, and the warm glow of the setting sun. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. "We're not perfect," Amara said softly, breaking the silence. "But we're trying, and that's what matters." Omar reached for her hand, his gaze filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Amara, for everything." Layla nodded, her expression sincere. "Yes, thank you. You've given us more than you know." As the baby cooed in Layla's arms, Amara felt a wave of contentment wash over her. The journey had been anything but easy, but it had brought them to this moment, a new beginning built on love, forgiveness, and hope for the future. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring content like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like this video and share where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.